Owning a Sega Saturn often comes with a ton of questions. Even once you get the basics down, there tends to be even more knowledge to be gained when it comes to peripherals, compatibility, and the Saturn's vast array of import titles. In part 1, we went over some topics like transparencies, emulation, video quality, and the retro bit pads that were recently released. In episode 2 here, we will be looking at some questions I get a lot of in direct messages, emails, and my comments section. I've tried to be objective as possible with each answer, and only presented my personal opinion for clarity and entertainment purposes. I hope you guys enjoy Fact or Fiction and the Sega Saturn Part 2. Since the very beginning of my channel, I have seen questions and statements regarding the Japanese version of Sega Ages Outrun not working on some Saturn hardware. Many claim that the game simply does not work on round button Sega Saturn systems, and that there are two versions of the game. If you go to a popular website like Sega Retro, you see no mention of it and only one scan of the Japanese game. Yet if you look under its dump status, there are two different ones clearly listed. Having never had this problem, I decided to go digging a bit deeper and decided to break out my copy of the game, see what version I had, and then try it across my many different Saturn consoles. The results were honestly quite surprising. I use a gray Japanese launch Saturn as my main system. I've never had any trouble playing Outrun on it, but according to what I've read, both versions of Outrun work fine on the older systems. So I broke out my black US round button to test out the game. Commonly referred to as the Model 2, this is the system some Sega Ages Outrun discs aren't supposed to work on. Yet it fired up and played just fine. My early thoughts were simply that people out there just burn shitty quality discs, and the issue had nothing to do with the original game itself. But I also remembered specifically one instance where it was claimed that the white Japanese round button system was at fault, so I decided to give that a go as well. To my surprise, my Sega Ages Outrun disc did not make it past the Sega screen as so many online claims had made. The game wouldn't get past this screen no matter what I tried. So right there, Sega Ages Outrun worked fine on a US round button, but not a Japanese one. Reading further, it seems the two versions of Sega Ages Outrun for the Saturn are marked by two different codes you need to look out for. These codes are displayed on the inner ring of the disc themselves. This code here is the first edition of the game that has issues, and this is the code of the second release of the game that has been fixed to work on all Saturn systems. The funny thing is that problems like these are often no issue at all for a large group of people. The only folks that have any real issue have a certain combination of hardware and software, but it's always good to know the facts so that you can pass them on and make them well known in the community. There are many of you out there that have known about this for a long time, so hopefully this segment will enlighten many more so that common knowledge can lead future Saturn owners in the right direction. Sega's Virtuous stick isn't exactly known as the champion among arcade stick options for the old Sega Saturn. It's cheaply made, doesn't feel like an arcade stick should, and frankly, it's only really good for its turbo options. For years I've heard that the Japanese version of this stick was vastly superior and the one to get. I had seen recommendations that while the Japanese version still wasn't great for fighting games, it was quite good for shoot-'em-ups, platformers, and other arcade-style action games. I decided to check one out for myself, and sure enough, it is a major increase in quality over the black US released versions. The Japanese version is labeled HSS0104 and includes a joystick that has micro switches, and the buttons feel noticeably better. The Japanese version also has a smaller ball top on the stick, whereas the US edition is oversized and feels quite awkward. Official arcade releases are actually a rough road for the Saturn. Most of the better ones are often so worn out and old, even they feel poor by today's standards. When you buy a 20-plus-year-old arcade stick, you will need to put in some work to clean and renew most of the parts for the best possible outcome. When you are in the market for something cheap, the Japanese version of this stick is definitely the way to go. They feel more like an arcade stick should, and many genres can still feel great with it. For years I have heard that third-party cartridges for the Saturn hurt the system. The basics of this thinking are that because the PCB is thicker, it puts more wear and tear on the slot putting them in and taking them out, even stretching and breaking the contacts in severe cases. When I was younger and using the first third-party devices for the Saturn, like the Memory Card Plus and the Game Shark, even I noticed that these carts were harder to put in and take out, and that many of my official carts stopped working every single time afterwards. Something was indeed amiss, so let's look a little deeper into the situation. Taking apart both an original memory card and a Game Shark revealed something quite concerning. While both PCBs were of very similar thickness, the Game Shark lacked the smooth beveled design of the Sega-made board. Even the corners of the Game Shark were blunt and sharp, which stood in direct contrast to the smooth Sega design. If you've ever looked inside a cartridge port, you'll notice that the pins are actually designed to allow a beveled PCB in properly. When the more blunt Game Shark board enters, it even scraped the plastic dividers between the pins, and can actually cause contact problems because of it. The bottom line is pretty simple on this one. Be cautious of what you jam into your Saturn's cartridge slot. Cheaper designs can and will have adverse effects on your hardware. It doesn't mean that they don't work, but it could spell problems in the long run you simply don't want. Thankfully, the two modern action replay carts I tried had nearly identical thicknesses and the beveled design of the original Sega cartridge. One of the most popular questions I get is, what is the best way to hook your Saturn up to a modern television? Options are everywhere today, from the cheap SCART to HDMI boxes, dedicated HDMI cables, and super expensive line doublers and upscalers like the OSSC and FrameMeister. The simple truth is, you can spend an absolute fortune on video cables alone for your retro hardware. What then is the very best way to hook your Saturn up to a modern television? Do the super cheap $30 HDMI cables do the trick? Or do you have to go with a $400 FrameMeister to get the job done? The answer really depends on what you need the Saturn to do. If you are simply capturing footage for your channel for things like Let's Plays or whatnot, the cheap HDMI cable is more than sufficient for the task. There is some blurring on faster moving games, but the overall image quality is good enough for such a simple thing. If you are looking to play serious and get the best possible experience in shoot 'em ups, fighting games, and other software where timing and reflexes mean everything, you'll want something that doesn't introduce a lot of lag. Here you want something along the lines of the Rad-2X. These boxes offer excellent image quality while not costing a fortune. They don't introduce game-breaking lag, and I have not had any issues getting my various television brands to work with it. It's a well-built device that gets the job done. Of special note, I'd like to take a moment and not recommend the FrameMeister for use with the Sega Saturn as your main way of playing. This device is versatile and has a ton of use for various tasks, but it's just awful as a Saturn option. The Saturn switches resolutions frequently. It's something you'll never notice on most televisions, but on a FrameMeister, every switch causes the video to blank out for as long as 5 to 10 seconds. This is mainly just an irritation on most games, but for some, it affects the experience so much you actually have a hard time playing them. Capturing Saturn with a FrameMeister is particularly frustrating because you not only have to deal with the FrameMeister switching the video, but you also have to wait for it to come back on something like the Elgato Game Capture. This double whammy of video resetting is not the best way to play a Sega Saturn at all. Another big topic I see among fans of the Saturn is the claim that Sega's 32-bit machine was more capable than Sony's PlayStation in the right hands. You often see games like Panzer Dragoon Saga, Virtua Fighter 2, and Grandia used as examples, and that's not even counting all the 2D stuff. What's the truth here though? Is the Saturn really just a misunderstood powerhouse that most developers lack the skill to develop properly for? Or was the PlayStation truly that much more powerful than Sega's sloppy design? The truth, like most things in life, resides somewhere in the middle. Sony designed the PlayStation around an elegant architecture that had a single chip doing the vast majority of the work. This means that developers could get decent results quickly, allowing the rest of the development cycle to smooth out performance and make everything look as good as possible. Namco famously took Ridge Racer from concept to finished game in a mere 6 months, a testament to how versatile Sony's design was. They had designed the product to be developer friendly and had native support for things like transparencies that didn't take large amounts of time to implement. To be as blunt as I can be here, the PlayStation was an efficiently designed piece of hardware for a new era of game. Sega, on the other hand, had a development cycle that started as competition for the Jaguar and 3DO. This meant that their system was poised to compete with technology essentially from 1992, and in their eyes, the Saturn was more than ready. But instead of a single fast and efficient CPU, Sega had two that used the same memory bus. To make things even murkier, they split the graphics load between two VDP chips. VDP-1 handled sprites and polygons, while VDP-2 did the overlays and backgrounds. This meant that within a traditional development environment, the Saturn often needed a ton more work to even get close to the results that the PlayStation could produce. Worse, this was the dawn of the home polygon game market, so resources, skill levels, and experience were all over the place. Most companies had never made these types of games before, and the Saturn just made that learning curve all the more difficult. Of course, when someone did have the skills and resources to harness all those chips in the Saturn, the results were hard to argue with. Some games were just beautiful in motion and showed that the hardware did indeed have a ton of potential. Sometimes games would get the two VDPs working in tandem in such a way you really did have to wonder whether the PlayStation was capable of recreating it. Of course, you will always have arguments in reverse as well, and there are games on PlayStation that the Saturn equally would have a hard time pulling off. I think perhaps the argument isn't so much which hardware was more powerful, but which developers actually had the skill to make the most impressive games. Groups like Lobotomy Software, AM2, Team Andromeda, and Treasure could put up visuals on the Saturn that rivaled anything from competing systems. The problem, of course, was that most developers did not.
No way you can stop me! Two, ready, go! No way you can stop me!
With Saturn games costing a fortune on eBay, backups and reproductions have become essential to the experience of owning the hardware. With some games going for hundreds and even thousands of dollars, only the more fortunate among us will ever have hope of owning the original discs. That means you need a way to play your burned CDs, and a question I often get hit with is whether to go Modchip or Pseudo Saturn cartridge. They both are around the same cost, so which one is better? There is something to be said about the Modchip route. Once it's in, you don't have to worry about a cartridge in your system or the compatibility problems that can arise because of them. They are easy to install and get the job done. The strength of the cartridge route cannot be denied, however. Depending on which cart you use, you get extra features like 4MB RAM for those Capcom 2D arcade games, as well as a region bypass so you can access the vast array of games from Japan. Some even have switches on them that allow you to use memory card functionality. These devices can be all-in-one solutions to get the job done. My only advice here is to be wary of the cheaply made variants. If the edge of the PCB isn't beveled, the corners rounded, and the contacts gold in color, find something else. It's hard not to recommend the cartridge route once you consider the sheer ease of use. If you want the most functionality without cracking open your Saturn, it's by far the best choice. There are other options such as an optical drive emulator and the forthcoming satiator, but they are quite a bit more expensive. The internet can be a dark place with tons of misinformation. Sometimes it's just simple mistakes easily fixed with the sharing of knowledge, and other times it can be subversive and concentrated ignorance that is chosen despite facts to the contrary. In 2020, there is still the belief that Saturn emulation is poor and not something that can be done well. I see this in my comments section for almost every video. In my last episode of this series, I tried to dispel the notion that Saturn emulation is still completely broken and not worth your time. The fact of the matter is, nothing could be further from the truth. Saturn emulation is alive and well today, and even runs on extremely modest PC hardware. The classic emulator SSF does a very decent job of playing most of the biggest games on the platform, and the more modern Mednafen can even do so at higher resolutions. Heck, you can smooth out some games to look so good in emulation that they simply destroy the original Saturn releases, and even games with performance issues can benefit heavily from the horsepower of today's technology. I'll say it again here so there is no mistake. If you want to emulate the Sega Saturn today, you have multiple options to do it well. The days of broken, choppy, and unplayable Saturn emulation are long gone. If you're new to the Saturn, try SSF first, as I feel it's the easiest to use. If you are a bit more computer savvy than the average Joe, Mednafen is the way to go.
KO.
Supporting and owning a Saturn is a journey of education and discovery. Even though I called this series Fact or Fiction, most of the stuff contained within are just my opinions on the various things I've learned over the years. The Saturn was a machine with a complicated history that is most often covered for its failure to reach the mass market success of the Sega Genesis. As a fan of the device and its software, I can tell you that this is only a tiny piece of a much larger and interesting story. If you ever decide to give the Saturn a real chance and play some of its better games, I'm sure you'll agree. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.